What drives a leader to finally speak out after decades of silence? At 87 years old, Pope Francis, the pioneering and compassionate leader of the Catholic Church, has consistently defied expectations and reshaped the boundaries of tradition. His papacy has been a beacon of humility, service, and advocacy for the voiceless yet persistent whispers about his personal life have lingered in the background, until now. From his modest upbringing in Argentina to his transformative leadership on the global stage, Pope Francis's journey is a story of unwavering faith and bold choices. But what does his recent revelation mean for his legacy? How has it reignited debates about the Church's role in a changing world? And why is this moment so significant in understanding the man behind the papal robes? Let's delve into the truth and its far-reaching impact. Who is Pope Francis when he steps away from the grand basilicas, the papal regalia, and the public eye? What truths about the man behind the title have eluded the world for so long? His recent statement has stunned many, confirming what some have long suspected. But before we delve into his revelation and its impact, let's take a step back and explore the life and journey that led Jorge Mario Bergoglio to become Pope Francis. The man we know today as Pope Francis was born on December 17, 1936, in the Flores neighborhood of Buenos Aires, Argentina. His parents, Mario and Regina, were Italian immigrants who had left their homeland in search of a better life. They brought with them not just their belongings, but the values that would become the foundation of young Jorge's upbringing. Simplicity, discipline, and a profound sense of faith. Life in the bustling capital city was far from glamorous for the Bergoglio family. Mario worked as a railway employee, a demanding and modest profession, while Regina cared for their growing household. Jorge, the eldest of 5 siblings, naturally became a figure of responsibility, helping his parents manage the day-to-day challenges of life in a foreign land. Growing up, Jorge was like any other boy in Buenos Aires, drawn to the vibrancy of the city and its rich culture. He had an infectious sense of humor and a sharp wit, traits that endeared him to his friends and family. Football was his great love and almost sacred pastime for Argentine boys. He spent countless hours playing in the streets with neighborhood children, navigating impromptu matches where rules were secondary to the sheer joy of the game. Yet even as he relished these carefree moments, there was an underlying seriousness to him, a quiet depth that hinted at the man he would one day become. His family's faith played a central role in shaping his worldview. Sunday mornings meant church, a ritual that wasn't just about religion, but also about community. Yet for Jorge, the Catholic Church wasn't confined to sermons and rituals. It represented something broader, a space for reflection, belonging, and purpose. Still, religion wasn't something that defined his early years. At this stage of his life, his dreams were practical, even scientific. He harbored aspirations of becoming a chemist, enrolling in a technical high school where he pursued studies in chemistry with genuine enthusiasm. It was during this period of youthful exploration that Jorge encountered challenges that would shape him profoundly. At the age of 21, he fell gravely ill with a respiratory infection so severe that surgeons had to remove part of his lung. The experience was life-altering, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. Spending months in recovery, he had time to reflect on life's fragility and its fleeting nature. This wasn't a dramatic lightning bolt moment that led him toward priesthood, but it planted seeds of introspection that would grow in the years to come. Around this time, Jorge began to feel a subtle but undeniable pull toward faith. His engagement with religion deepened, not through grand, zealous acts, but through quiet, personal moments of reflection. By 22, he made a life-altering decision to join the Society of Jesus, a decision that would steer the course of his future. For Jorge, the Jesuit order wasn't just about theology. It was a call to serve the most vulnerable, to embrace intellectual rigor, and to confront the social inequalities he saw around him. These principles would later become cornerstones of his leadership. But in Buenos Aires, the world was anything but tranquil. The Argentina of Jorge's youth was marked by stark contrasts. Wealth coexisted with dire poverty, and political unrest simmered beneath the surface. These realities weren't abstract for Jorge. They were part of the streets he walked and the lives he witnessed every day. It was here, amid the bustling, often chaotic life of the city, that his views on justice and service began to take root. Jorge wasn't just studying theology. He was grappling with how to apply it to a world rife with inequality. Even as he immersed himself in seminary life, the same boy who had once kicked a football down the streets of Flores remained deeply curious about the world. Jorge didn't retreat into theological texts alone. He read widely, philosophy, literature, history, seeking to understand humanity from as many angles as possible. For him, the church was not just a refuge. It was a force that could engage with society to make it better. His faith was active, not passive. By the time he took his first vows as a Jesuit, Jorge was no longer just a young man searching for his path. He had found it, not in the quiet confines of personal ambition, but in a vocation that demanded engagement, compassion, and resilience. His health struggles had given him an unshakable empathy for those who suffered, and his upbringing had instilled in him a deep sense of duty toward the poor and marginalized. Yet even as he stepped firmly onto this path, there was no sign that he would one day lead the Catholic Church. At this point in his journey, Jorge was simply a man committed to living out his faith in a way that mattered. As we step further into his story, it's clear that the foundation of Pope Francis's life was built not on ambition but on service. But how did this unassuming young man from Buenos Aires rise to the pinnacle of the Catholic Church? And what shaped his journey from local priest to global leader? And perhaps most intriguing, how did the whispers about his personal life begin to take hold? The answers lie in the next chapter of his remarkable life. Jorge Mario Bergoglio's decision to join the Jesuits was not merely a spiritual choice. It was a leap into a world that demanded intellectual discipline, service to others, and a life of humility. The Jesuits were known for their rigorous training, blending academic excellence with practical service. For Jorge, this was an environment that resonated deeply with his emerging sense of purpose. His days were filled with study, prayer, and community work, but it was the connection to people, especially the marginalized, that truly shaped his identity. By the late 1950s, Argentina was in the grip of profound political and social unrest. The country's working-class population faced mounting challenges, with poverty and inequality creating deep divisions. For a young Jesuit like Jorge, these struggles were not abstract. They were the lived realities of the people he encountered in his daily work. He saw families struggling to make ends meet, children forced into labor, and communities torn apart by political unrest. These experiences left an indelible mark on him, fueling his commitment to social justice. Jorge's intellectual pursuits during this period were just as intense as his work in the community. He immersed himself in the study of philosophy and theology, seeking to understand how faith could address the complexities of human suffering and societal challenges. His teachers noted his sharp intellect, but it was his compassion and willingness to listen that set him apart. For Jorge, theology was not about lofty ideas disconnected from reality. It was a tool to engage with the world and inspire meaningful change. It was during this formative period that Jorge began to develop a leadership style that would later define his papacy. He believed in leading by example, rejecting the trappings of authority in favor of humility and accessibility. His peers and mentors noticed his ability to connect with people from all walks of life, whether they were fellow seminarians or members of the struggling communities he served. This ability to build genuine relationships would become one of his most powerful tools as a leader. In 1969, Jorge was ordained as a priest, marking the beginning of a new chapter in his journey. His ordination was not a grand affair, but a solemn and deeply personal moment. By this time, Jorge had already spent years reflecting on what it meant to serve, not just within the walls of a church, but in the streets, neighborhoods, and homes of the people who needed him most. His approach to priesthood was defined by action, visiting the sick, feeding the hungry, and providing spiritual guidance to those who felt abandoned by society. As a newly ordained priest, Jorge quickly gained a reputation for his dedication and humility. He avoided the hierarchical distance often associated with clergy, choosing instead to immerse himself in the lives of those he served. Whether it was sharing meals with the poor or spending hours listening to the struggles of parishioners, Jorge's ministry was grounded in empathy and understanding. He saw his role not as one of authority, but as a bridge between the church and the people. By the 1970s, Argentina was entering one of the darkest periods in its history. The country was under military dictatorship, a regime marked by repression, human rights abuses, and widespread fear. For Jorge, this was a time of immense personal and professional challenge. As a Jesuit leader, he had to navigate the treacherous waters of political turmoil while protecting the members of his community. His cautious yet compassionate approach helped him maintain the trust of both his congregation and his peers. It was during this time that whispers about Jorge's unconventional views and methods began to emerge. While some in the church valued his focus on social justice and inclusivity, others questioned his willingness to challenge traditional norms. These whispers, though subtle, began to hint at the complexities of his character, an individual deeply committed to his faith but unafraid to confront its limitations. As Jorge's influence within the Jesuit order grew, so did his responsibilities. In 1973, he was appointed as the provincial superior of the Jesuits in Argentina, a position that placed him in charge of guiding the order through a turbulent era. This role tested his leadership abilities in ways he could not have anticipated. He faced criticism from all sides. Some accused him of not doing enough to confront the dictatorship, while others believed he was too outspoken. Jorge's approach, however, was guided by a principle that would later define his papacy: the belief that true leadership requires both courage and prudence. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Jorge continued to work tirelessly for the people of Argentina, often in ways that were unseen by the public. He visited prisons, cared for the sick, and provided support to those living on the margins of society. His commitment to the poor and disenfranchised earned him the respect of many, but it also drew criticism from those who viewed his approach as too progressive. Despite the challenges, Jorge remained steadfast in his mission, believing that the Church's primary role was to serve the vulnerable. As the years went on, Jorge's influence extended beyond the Jesuit community. He began to take on more prominent roles within the broader Catholic Church in Argentina, gaining recognition for his humility, intellect, and unwavering commitment to social justice. Yet even as his profile grew, he remained deeply connected to the people he served. Unlike many of his peers, Jorge shunned the luxuries often associated with church leadership, choosing instead to live simply and travel by public transport. These choices were not just symbolic, they were a reflection of his belief that the Church should model the humility and compassion it preaches. By the late 1990s, Jorge had become a well-known figure within the Church, both in Argentina and beyond. His work in the slums of Buenos Aires and his advocacy for the poor had solidified his reputation as a priest of the people. Yet, despite his rising influence, he continued to face scrutiny. The whispers about his unorthodox methods and his willingness to challenge traditional church norms persisted, creating an air of mystery around him. As Jorge prepared to step into more significant roles within the church hierarchy, it was clear that his journey was far from over. The man who had once dreamed of becoming a chemist had transformed into a spiritual leader who was redefining what it meant to serve. But even as he rose through the ranks, the questions about his personal life and beliefs continued to linger. These questions, subtle yet persistent, hinted at a complexity that would only become more apparent in the years to come. With each step of his journey, Jorge Mario Bergoglio became not just a servant of the Church, but a symbol of its potential to evolve. His life was a testament to the power of faith, humility, and action. Yet, as we move closer to the moment when he would finally address the whispers that had followed him for decades, one thing remains clear. Jorge's story is not just about the past. It is about the enduring hope and courage that define his legacy. By the time Jorge Mario Bergoglio was appointed as the Archbishop of Buenos Aires in 1998, his reputation as a man of the people was firmly established. His years of serving Argentina's most vulnerable had shaped not only his views, but also the way he carried himself as a leader. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he rejected the pomp and privilege often associated with higher church positions. He chose to live in a modest apartment rather than the Grand Archbishop's residence, cooked his own meals, and traveled around the city by bus or subway. These choices were more than acts of humility. They were a reflection of his unwavering commitment to simplicity and solidarity with the everyday struggles of the people he served. As Archbishop, Jorge's mission to bridge the gap between the church and the poor intensified. Buenos Aires, like much of Argentina, was facing economic hardship and social unrest during this period. The disparity between the rich and the poor was stark, and the church under Jorge's leadership became a refuge for those who felt abandoned by society. He often visited the slums, known locally as Villas Miseria, spending time with families, listening to their concerns, and offering both spiritual and practical support. For the people in these struggling communities, he wasn't just a figurehead. He was someone who walked among them, understood their pain, and advocated for their dignity. Jorge's leadership style was as unconventional as it was impactful. He rarely sat behind a desk or delivered long theological discourses. Instead, he focused on action, feeding the hungry, sheltering the homeless, and advocating for systemic change. He frequently criticized both government policies and church practices that, in his view, failed to address the needs of the marginalized. His blunt assessments earned him both admiration and criticism, but Jorge remained undeterred. For him, the role of the church was clear: to be a voice for the voiceless and a source of hope in the darkest of times. Yet, even as his influence grew, so did the whispers. Some within the church hierarchy viewed Jorge's focus on poverty and social justice as too progressive, even radical. Others questioned his reluctance to engage in the traditional displays of power and authority that were expected of someone in his position. These murmurs of dissent were compounded by the fact that Jorge himself was a deeply private man. He rarely spoke about his personal life, his motivations, or his struggles, preferring instead to let his actions speak for themselves. This silence only fueled speculation, with many wondering what lay beneath his composed and humble exterior. In 2001, Pope John Paul II elevated Jorge to the rank of cardinal, a move that placed him in the global spotlight. As Cardinal Bergoglio, he carried the same humility and resolve that had defined his earlier roles. He continued to advocate for the poor and marginalized, using his new platform to amplify his message on a global scale. However, his reluctance to embrace the pomp and ceremony of his new position set him apart from his peers. He often spoke about the dangers of materialism and the need for the church to return to its roots of humility and service. For many, he was a breath of fresh air in a world where religious leadership often seemed distant and detached. Despite his growing prominence, Jorge remained firmly rooted in his mission. He spent much of his time in Buenos Aires, continuing to serve the communities that had shaped his ministry. However, his influence was no longer confined to Argentina. His speeches and writings began to gain international attention, particularly his critiques of economic inequality and the exploitation of the vulnerable. These themes resonated far beyond the borders of Argentina, striking a chord with people across the globe who saw in Jorge a leader who was not afraid to challenge the status quo. The year 2005 brought a significant moment in Jorge's journey. With the passing of Pope John Paul II, the Catholic Church faced the task of electing a new pope. During the papal conclave, Jorge's name emerged as a serious contender. His humility, progressive views, and deep connection to the people made him an appealing choice for many cardinals. However, the conclave ultimately elected Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, who became Pope Benedict XVI. Jorge reportedly expressed relief at not being chosen, telling those close to him that he felt unworthy of such a role. Yet this moment marked the beginning of his transition from a regional leader to a figure of global significance. In the years that followed, Jorge continued to lead with the same quiet determination that had defined his career. But the church itself was grappling with significant challenges. Scandals, declining membership, and growing criticism of its rigidity left many questioning its relevance in the modern world. For Jorge, these issues were deeply personal. He believed that the church needed to become more inclusive, compassionate, and engaged with the realities of contemporary life. This vision would later become a cornerstone of his papacy. When Pope Benedict XVI announced his resignation in 2013, the Catholic Church was once again thrust into the global spotlight. The decision was unprecedented in modern times, and speculation about who would succeed him was rampant. Jorge, now in his late 70s, attended the conclave with no expectation of being elected. He was a respected figure, but his low-key demeanor and aversion to self-promotion made him an unlikely candidate in the eyes of many observers. And yet, the conclave's decision was clear. On March 13, 2013, Jorge Mario Bergoglio was elected as the 266th Pope of the Catholic Church. He chose the name Francis, inspired by Saint Francis of Assisi, a figure known for his humility, love of nature, and dedication to the poor. The choice of name was itself a statement, a signal that his papacy would be defined by a commitment to simplicity and service. From the moment he stepped onto the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica to greet the world as Pope Francis, it was evident that his leadership would break with tradition. His first words were not proclamations of authority but a request. "Pray for me." This simple act set the tone for what would become a transformative papacy, one rooted in humility, dialogue, and a relentless focus on those most in need. As Pope Francis began his work, the whispers about his personal life did not fade away. If anything, they grew louder. His progressive stances on issues such as climate change, economic inequality, and inclusivity challenged both secular and religious norms, drawing admiration and criticism in equal measure. But what was it about him that made these whispers persist? What truths had he kept guarded? And why were they coming to light now at this moment in his life? The answer lies in understanding not just the man, but the values he embodies. For Pope Francis, leadership has never been about power or status. It has always been about service, about meeting people where they are and guiding them toward hope and transformation. As the world begins to grasp the significance of his recent revelation, it becomes clear that this moment is not just about him. It is about the enduring power of truth and the courage it takes to live it. Pope Francis's election in 2013 marked a new chapter not only for the Catholic Church, but for the global community. From the outset, his papacy stood apart. As the first pope from the Americas, the first Jesuit pope, and the first to take the name Francis, his rise was seen as a clear departure from tradition. These symbolic firsts were accompanied by actions that quickly cemented his reputation as a pope of the people. His refusal to live in the Apostolic Palace, opting instead for a modest suite in the Vatican guest house, was more than a personal preference. It was a statement about the kind of leader he intended to be. Francis made it clear from the beginning that his focus was on those often overlooked by society. His first major trip as Pope was to Lampedusa, a small island in the Mediterranean that had become a waypoint for migrants risking everything to escape poverty and conflict. Standing before a sea littered with the wreckage of migrants' boats, he spoke of the globalization of indifference, calling on the world to confront the dehumanization of the most vulnerable. It was a powerful message, and one that would define much of his papacy. Yet even as he endeared himself to millions through his humility and advocacy, Pope Francis faced significant challenges. Within the Vatican, resistance to his progressive vision began to surface. His calls for inclusivity and his emphasis on mercy were seen by some as a threat to the Church's traditions. The reforms he sought to implement, ranging from greater transparency in Vatican finances to a more open approach to contentious social issues, were met with criticism from conservative factions within the Church. As Francis navigated these internal struggles, the whispers about his personal life grew louder. His progressive stances on issues like climate change, LGBTQ+ rights, and economic inequality set him apart from many of his predecessors, fueling both admiration and skepticism. For some, these positions were a refreshing sign of the Church evolving to meet the needs of a modern world. For others, they raised questions about his motivations and beliefs. One of the most striking aspects of Francis' leadership has been his willingness to embrace controversial topics that others before him had avoided. In 2015, he released Laudato Si', an encyclical that addressed the urgent need for environmental stewardship. In it, he criticized unchecked consumerism and the exploitation of natural resources, calling on individuals, businesses, and governments to take responsibility for the planet's future. The document was hailed as groundbreaking, not just for its content, but for its tone, a direct, unflinching acknowledgement of humanity's role in the climate crisis. But while Laudato Si' earned him praise from environmentalists and progressive Catholics, it also drew criticism from those who saw it as overstepping the traditional boundaries of papal authority. Similar debates arose around his comments on LGBTQ+ issues. In 2013, just months into his papacy, Francis famously remarked, "Who am I to judge?" when asked about gay priests. It was a simple statement, but one that signaled a significant shift in tone for the Church. While his comments did not represent a change in official doctrine, They reflected a broader push for compassion and understanding, principles that have defined his approach to leadership. These moments of openness and inclusivity have been central to Pope Francis's identity, yet they have also fueled the intrigue surrounding him. Questions about his personal life, his past, his relationships, and his private beliefs have persisted throughout his tenure. In many ways, these whispers are a testament to his ability to defy categorization. He is a pope who champions tradition but also challenges it, a leader who values humility but commands immense influence. As the years passed, the weight of these rumors began to grow. For decades, Pope Francis had avoided addressing them directly, allowing his actions to speak louder than words. But in recent months, his willingness to confront these questions head-on has taken center stage. During a candid moment in a public address, he acknowledged the persistent speculation, offering a glimpse into the private struggles he has carried for much of his life. His words, though brief, were profound. The truth sets us free, but it is not always easy to carry. The reaction was immediate and global. For some, his statement was a confirmation of what they had long suspected. For others, it was a reminder of his humanity, the fact that even the leader of the Catholic Church is not immune to the complexities of life. His admission sparked a wave of reflection, both within the Church and beyond. What does it mean for a pope to reveal such personal truths? And how does this moment shape his legacy? Francis's decision to speak out has been interpreted in many ways. Some see it as an act of transparency, a continuation of his commitment to openness and inclusivity. Others view it as a strategic move, a way to address lingering doubts and criticisms as he nears the twilight of his papacy. Regardless of the motivations, the impact of his words cannot be understated. They have prompted a broader conversation about the role of vulnerability in leadership and the power of truth to inspire change. As Pope Francis reflects on his journey, he remains steadfast in his mission. His recent revelations have not diminished his resolve. They have only deepened it. For him, the Church is not a fortress of dogma, but a living, breathing community, one that must adapt and evolve to meet the needs of its people. His leadership has always been about more than titles or tradition. It is about creating a space where faith, compassion, and justice intersect. The significance of this moment extends far beyond the whispers and rumors. It is a testament to the resilience of a man who has dedicated his life to serving others, often at great personal cost. It is a reminder that even the most revered figures are shaped by their struggles and imperfections. And it is a call to all of us to confront our own truths, however difficult they may be. As Pope Francis continues his work, the world watches with a mix of admiration and curiosity. His legacy is still being written, but one thing is clear. His willingness to engage with the complexities of life has made him a leader unlike any other. In the face of challenges and controversies, he has remained a steadfast advocate for hope, humility, and the enduring power of faith. And as he steps into the final chapters of his papacy, his message remains as relevant as ever. The path to truth may be difficult, but it is always worth walking. As Pope Francis enters the twilight years of his papacy, the weight of his journey is ever more evident. At this stage of his life, he is no longer just the man who broke barriers as the first pope from the Americas or the first Jesuit to hold the position. He has become a symbol of resilience, humility, and the enduring power of faith to transform not only individuals but institutions. The years have not been easy, and neither have the choices he has made along the way. Yet, with every step, he has continued to challenge the status quo, urging both the Church and the world to re-examine their priorities. His recent statement addressing long-standing rumors is perhaps the clearest reflection of his character. In choosing to speak openly about matters that many leaders might shy away from, Pope Francis has once again demonstrated his belief in the power of truth. For him, leadership is not about perfection, but about authenticity. His willingness to confront the whispers that have surrounded him for decades is not just a personal act of courage, it is a message to all who have ever struggled with the weight of expectation. The impact of his words has rippled far beyond the Vatican walls. For many Catholics, his admission has been a moment of profound connection, a reminder that even the highest leader in their faith is human. For others, it has sparked debates about the future of the Church and its ability to adapt to a rapidly changing world. But for Pope Francis, the purpose of his statement was not to court controversy or divide opinions. It was, as it has always been, to guide people toward a deeper understanding of faith, compassion, and the importance of living with integrity. In reflecting on his legacy, it becomes clear that Pope Francis has reshaped not just the Catholic Church, but the way the world views religious leadership. From his work on climate change to his advocacy for the marginalized, his papacy has been defined by action. He has consistently emphasized the need for the Church to be a force for good in the world, addressing real issues rather than retreating behind walls of tradition. His insistence on dialogue, whether with world leaders or everyday people, has opened doors that were once thought to be permanently closed. Take, for example, his tireless advocacy for migrants and refugees. At a time when many countries have closed their borders and hardened their hearts, Pope Francis has called for compassion and solidarity. His visits to refugee camps, where he has washed the feet of migrants and shared meals with them, are not just symbolic gestures. They are acts of profound humanity. These moments have reminded the world that the Church, at its best, is a refuge for those in need. His work on environmental issues has been equally groundbreaking. Laudato Si', his 2015 encyclical on the environment, was not just a call to action for Catholics, but a plea to all of humanity. In it, he wrote about the interconnectedness of creation, emphasizing that caring for the earth is a moral responsibility. His message resonated with environmentalists and policymakers alike, sparking conversations that continue to shape global initiatives. For Pope Francis, the environment is not just a political issue, it is a spiritual one, deeply tied to the well-being of the most vulnerable. Yet, even as he has pushed for progress, Pope Francis has faced significant resistance. Within the Church, his efforts to promote inclusivity and reform have been met with criticism from more conservative factions. His views on LGBTQ+ issues, for instance, have sparked intense debate. While he has not changed official Church doctrine, his compassionate tone and calls for understanding have been seen as a shift in approach. Statements like, "Who am I to judge?" and his support for civil unions have been celebrated by some as steps toward inclusivity, while others have viewed them as controversial. Through it all, Pope Francis has remained steadfast in his belief that the Church must be a place of mercy and openness. He has often spoken about the importance of listening to God, to one another, and to the world's most vulnerable. For him, faith is not about exclusion, but about bringing people together. This vision has guided his papacy and continues to inspire millions, even as it challenges others to rethink long-held assumptions. As the years have passed, the whispers about his personal life have evolved into a larger conversation about the nature of leadership. What does it mean to lead with vulnerability? How does one balance the expectations of tradition with the need for change? Pope Francis's recent statement addressing these questions has added another layer to his already complex legacy. It is a reminder that even in the highest positions of power, there is room for humanity, honesty, and growth. Looking ahead, the world wonders what the final years of Pope Francis's papacy will bring. He has hinted at the possibility of resignation, following the example of Pope Benedict XVI. Yet for now, he remains focused on his mission, to bring hope to the hopeless, to challenge injustice, and to guide the Church toward a future that reflects the values of compassion, humility, and truth. In many ways, Pope Francis's life has come full circle. The boy from Buenos Aires who dreamed of becoming a chemist has become a global figure, shaping conversations about the environment, social justice, and the future of faith. His journey has been marked by challenges, but also by an unwavering commitment to serving others. His recent revelations, far from diminishing his legacy, have only deepened it, showing the world that leadership is not about hiding imperfections, but about embracing them as part of the human experience. As his story continues to unfold, one thing is certain: Pope Francis will be remembered not just as a pope, but as a force for change. His life has been a testament to the power of faith to transcend boundaries, inspire action, and foster understanding. In his own words, "The truth sets us free." And through his truth, Pope Francis has reminded us all of the beauty and strength found in honesty, humility, and the courage to lead by example. With that, we have reached the end of today's video. If you have come this far with us, be sure to check out other videos on the channel.